Happy Thursday, everyone. This is So What, the Marketing Analytics Insights live show from Trust Insights. I'm Chris. John, how you doing?
Good. This is my last day in the virtual studio here, so we'll be back to the normal deal next time we're on.
Very nice. And Katie is somewhere in the mountains, lost. We're going to send some drones to find her.
Hopefully they're safe. We'll keep
hopefully. Today, we're going to answer the question about should you, and if so, could you automate the construction of an email newsletter using generative AI tools? And we're going to specifically do it using the Marketing Over Coffee newsletter as an example. So, John, start us off. What is the Marketing Over Coffee newsletter? How often does it go out? How long does it take to make it, etc.?
Yeah, so over the years, we've collected email addresses of folks that listen to the podcast. So they get the podcast weekly and are able to kind of keep track there. But this idea of sending them an email, right now it ends up being quarterly pretty much of here's the, 2 or 3 of the biggest shows over the quarter. And then I usually just have 4 or 5 other links of things that I, throw into a pile that I want to push and hit. But there's definitely an opportunity for it to go more frequent. I mean, there's no shortage of content. We have tons of stuff. And so then it's a matter of, the challenge right now, though, is it's low priority work. I mean, we have to get the episodes out. The sponsors have signed on to specific episodes and specific sponsorships. So creating that content always takes the top shelf because, I would love to do it at least monthly, and it ends up being quarterly because after 2 months, I'm like, okay, I have to crank one of these out the door because I haven't done it in so long. But the thing is, it's more, discipline. It's not that it's a ton of work. It's just that it's sitting down to write the content, come up with that first ugly draft. And then after that, it's mostly cut and paste. We use Ghost for the distribution of it, which that's gone through a bunch of iterations too. We've used different email service providers, and then now we've switched over to this publishing model just because it was kind of less headache. But that's the kind of the starting point for the thing.
Got it. So what would going to monthly, what would the benefit be versus quarterly?
It's all just about more engagement, because we do find that even if it's because there have been times where I started doing it, monthly or better, and it still gets great engagement. Like it's content that people want. So there's no reason not to publish as often as we can. It's just a matter of making the time for the work. The other big one with that too is it's a great value add for the sponsors because we get to plug whatever they're plugging in the episodes. It's very difficult for people to click through an ad when they're listening to a podcast. But if the email's right in front of them and we literally say, hey, NetSuite by Oracle is helping us out this month, go ahead and give them a click here, check out what they've got going on. That drives a lot of traffic, and those are qualified leads. So that's a real upsell for the sponsors.
Got it. So in terms of the audience, who is the audience? What does that customer profile look like?
Yeah, I mean, we don't really know much beyond the fact that they are Marketing Over Coffee fans. I mean, they listen to the show and have somehow been driven to moc.com. But yeah, that's another one. Tom Webster is, looking down on me with a frown because if we were doing more research, we would, because I think a big part of it, I think there's a segment of that audience that doesn't have time to listen, or it's just easier for them to read, an email and to pick the highlights and get summaries of things. So yeah, not much known. They do fit the Marketing Over Coffee audience profile, but not much knowledge beyond that as far as like why are they opening the email and what else are they interested in. We really have no other insight there.
Got it. So this is something that Katie put together before she got lost in the mountains. This is the ideal customer profile for the show based on the shows, some of its competitors, some of the folks that you would want to have as listeners. In terms of people who are tuning in, how well does this resonate?
Well, the thing when she had pulled that, we really focused primarily on advertisers, folks that are using this audience. So it's people who value this audience, which, it still ends up being the same audience. So the research is the same because it's the same group of people. It's just a matter of them being, their target versus my target. But yeah, it's definitely dead on. You've got the intersection of marketing and tech. It's folks who are listening for actionable tactics, very specific in marketing and tech. It's not, this is not Joe Rogan. This is a very specific audience. But of course that makes them very valuable to advertisers too. There's no wasted, impressions with this group. I mean, everybody listening to the show is very interested in marketing and technology and trying to, get their organization to stay at peak performance. It made, and then, I don't know, I don't want to dig in too deep into the ICP because we have a lot of stuff that we're kicking around with this and going on with it, but it is great in that it goes all the way to, okay, and so here's the tactics that work, and here's your competitors, the tactics that they've been using, and here's suggestions as far as, what to do next, things you should shortlist as far as activities to test out and go. So, it's a good picture of who the listeners are and kind of what we need to be doing going forward.
Yeah, one of which is called out as newsletter optimization, doing more with the newsletter. So walk me through the process of making an issue of the newsletter. You sent over one not too long ago, but talk me through what is in the average issue of the newsletter.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, looking at the newsletter, you can see the format of the thing, and in Ghost, it's a WYSIWYG document. So basically, I have one of those in front of me, and it's always the same basic format of there's editor's intro. I just kind of say, hey, how you doing? Talk about one or two big things that have happened, and then there's usually 3 to 5 segments beneath that. Usually 2 or 3 of them are the bigger interviews from the past month or two, and then there is kind of an X factor in there. There are usually at least 1 or 2 spots of just random things that I've come across in the past month that I think are appropriate for the audience. And sometimes they haven't even been in the show. They're just things that have come across, and for whatever reason, it's more appropriate to hit it via email. But yeah, it's literally just 5 chunks of the biggest thing that biggest things that have happened over the past couple months. And usually 3 or 4 of them are direct from the show. And then I always, the last wrap is always entertainment or media or books, some kind of media recommendation and a farewell out. But yeah, it's basically kind of stare at that blank sheet and fill in the blanks until I get something that's, crowd worthy.
How long does it take?
It takes about an hour to get the thing where I want it to be. It's one of those things where I have it as a side project so that as I'm between calls or whatever, I'll spend 10 or 15 minutes on it and just keep chipping away at it over like 3 or 4 days. Because usually I'll start hacking away on it on a Friday or Monday, and the goal is to get it out the door and not, go to the Friday graveyard, get it out before Thursday afternoon.
Got it. Okay. So it's gathering up the episodes. So you have to go to the website, gather up the episodes and the URLs from the website. We don't, for the show, most of the time do transcripts. It's usually just show notes. What would it take to put the transcripts on the website?
Yeah, that's, we've done that in the past. I've done it for big episodes. I mean, it was using Otter, just throw the audio file in there and cut and paste it back over. We've switched to Fireflies, and I haven't tested that out yet. There's also, I know Libsyn is supporting some kind of transcript stuff, and I haven't had a chance to play with that either. So yeah, that's just been on the kind of to-do list forever of find a quicker, easier way to do that, or hire that out or whatever. And it just never gets done. I have, in the past done it for bigger episodes. If I ever come to a point where I want to do an encore episode or repush an episode, then I definitely run a transcript. But yeah, that's basically, it's not as bad as the missing metadata, but it's definitely in the top 5 of like data that should be in the data store.
Yeah, because you can see here, this episode, this is the one that you did with Katie recently. This is what's in the show notes. Now, in preparation for today's episode, because transcripts are an important part of feeding generative AI useful information, I went ahead and I put the transcripts. So I used, we switched over to Fireflies. So I put 9 episodes worth into Fireflies and just dumped that out and put it back in. So you can see this is what's in the show notes. And then when you get to the transcript, we have a lot of text, a lot of valuable information in here that you would want to have if you were going to be building, if you're going to be putting the stuff up to promote it and to get it into newsletters.
Yeah, well, and then, from the ICP too, it really leans hard on SEO. And that's a whole nother benefit of that, is having all that text in there. That's a lot of rich text, and it's all, keyword appropriate. It's not machine generated. Like, that's real life speak on that stuff. So that's all quality.
Exactly. Okay. So you gather the episodes, we summarize the episodes, sponsor content. How do you decide which sponsors go in the newsletter? Is it just the ones that have advertised for that quarter?
Usually the ones that have advertised for that quarter, that's kind of that comes down to a deal to deal date basis. But I know it could easily, if it just grabbed the two. I'm trying to think how it would do that, because actually quarter over quarter it's not changing a lot. There's usually two primary sponsors that ride for the quarter. So if it would grab from one of those, that's fine. Or again, I know as soon as I'm putting it together, it's literally just a cut and paste from the same page here.
Got it. And then the format of the newsletter, is it just a web editor?
Yeah, it's a Ghost's interface, which is WYSIWYG, but I can cut and paste code over there. So if it dumps HTML, that's good enough for me to get running with.
Got it. Okay. And then how do you measure the success of the newsletter?
That is just kind of opens and clicks. That's literally all we go with, and landing pages. Of course, I occasionally use Bitly links. If there's one I want to see how it's doing, I'll throw a Bitly link in there just so I can go back and check in on it later. But it's not, it's pretty much as long as it's the same as the last previous newsletters. If there's a 10 to 30% open and, I get a couple hundred clicks, like that's all good. It's definitely, I'm not optimizing the thing or testing, what's going. It's more of just like, okay, if it gets some action, that's great.
Got it. Okay. So if you were to use generative AI to build the newsletter, at least a first draft of it, what would you be looking for in terms of benefits to you, benefits to the audience, benefits to the sponsors?
Yeah, I think, it could take a lot of the pain out of the ugly first draft. Like in a perfect scenario, it would take a look at the last 4 or 5 episodes and just create summaries for each of the episodes and grab the sponsors and just dump that all into HTML. In a perfect world, it would just dump it right into Ghost, and then I could just move the cubes around. But getting to HTML would be at least enough for me not to have to do the writing on that first round, just be able to start cutting and pasting stuff.
Got it. So if you had something that looked maybe like this, would this be a good first draft?
Yeah, that's a perfect place to start with, right? And the great thing with that is I could give that to a VA and say, okay, put that over in Ghost and go get some graphics and clean it up. And, that would that takes a lot of the pure grunt work out of it.
Yep, because you have your sponsored by, your fun stuff about the fun stuff that was mentioned in that quarter's shows, etc.
That is cool. Wow. And that's that's way beyond the scanning that I'm able to do. My pathetic mind can grab the fun stuff from the past 2 episodes or so, but to be able to get the full list from like the last 6, that's killer.
Okay, so let's talk about how you build this, because I think there's a there for being able to do this. The first thing we need to do is we need to know what a good newsletter should be, right? Because a good newsletter for a podcast generally should be more than just spitting out a pile of links. That doesn't really help anyone. So let's start off by we're gonna go into Google's Gemini here, and I'm going to put in our system prompt instructions. This is just going to help flesh out the topic, and I'm going to say your topic is creating best practices for creating a newsletter, a monthly newsletter that supports a podcast, a weekly podcast. So let's see what Gemini has to say about, I'm going to turn the safeties down here. So it says things like consistent value alignment with your podcast, strategic content strategy for maximum engagement, optimize design and format for readability and action, promote your newsletter effectively, analyze and adapt and analyze your data. So that's pretty decent in terms of things that we would want a newsletter to do. Let's go ahead now. So we've got our basic instructions about what a newsletter for a podcast should do. We need to get the information, and we need 2 pieces of information. The first is we need that ideal customer profile. And the second would be we would want to have the actual episode content itself. Now, one of the things that you can do with podcasts, if you have a standard show, is you can actually go to the feed, the RSS feed itself, and as long as your feed publishes full episodes and not episode summaries, if your transcripts are on the page of the episodes, your feed contains the whole transcript. And this is super valuable and fast for getting essentially the raw materials that the AI needs to be able to create episode summaries and stuff. So if your feed has that, then you're pretty much like 3/4 of the way done. You'd want to copy and paste this into a text file that you would ask it to read. The next thing you'd want to do is you'd want to build that ideal customer profile. Who is your audience? Who is it you're trying to make your newsletter for? And this, by the way, applies to any newsletter, not just podcast newsletters, but any newsletter at all. Building out that ideal customer profile means that you know who you're writing for, and you can evaluate whether or not your newsletter is a good fit. Or you can even take your existing raw data and format it. And if you like help building that, of course, shameless plug, we do that. Go to trustinsights.ai/AI services. We can help you do that. Okay, so let's say we've got those two pieces. The next thing we do is we need to start assembling the prompt. And the prompt, this is where we're going to go away from basic prompt engineering. We're going to go into some fairly heavy stuff because today's language models are incredibly capable of following very, very detailed instructions. So we're gonna do this like a cooking show. I did a lot of baking in the background because this stuff takes hours to get right the first time. Once you've got it right, then it's pushing a button and off you go. So let me walk you through the pieces of this prompt. First, you say it's system instructions, and let's see if I can make this bigger because it's kind of hard to see. Typeface, regular. Let's go to, that's too large, 18. And can we fit this to the window? Fit to window width. There we go. Okay. So in our prompt, we first have our background. Here's the best practices for creating a podcast newsletter. We just talked through that with the machine, and it spit out all this very useful information about what should be in a podcast newsletter. Common mistakes, what to avoid, writing a wall of text, and so on and so forth. Some common myths, and then some surprising truths, personalization matters, A/B testing, etc. So that's the best practices. We want to have that as part of the prompt because it tells the model, here's what you should be doing. Like, these are your basic guidelines. The next section is we want to start giving it instructions. You'll notice, by the way, anything that's background information like that, I keep with these three N dashes to let the model know that's copy. It should just read. You're going to create the podcast newsletter in valid markdown format. The user, us, will provide the following configuration information: the podcast title, the ideal customer profile, the episode text, and in our case, sponsor information. If the user does not provide this information, ask for it. Using the provided episode's text file, you're going to create summaries following this format. You'll note the episode title uses the episode's URL in Markdown to make the title clickable, because we want this to be something that can go into an actual newsletter. Each episode is separated by the Apple headphones there do not include the delimiters. And so I have specified in this template, this is what I want every episode summary to be. The title, the URL in clickable format, the URL in naked so that if it's in the text, email reader, whatever, someone can copy and paste it. And then directions: write a 1-sentence episode summary on why the ICP would care. This is important because we want it to use the knowledge of who the ICP is. You'll notice all these things are here in curly braces. The curly braces are there because it is a way to denote to the model. These are essentially placeholders. They're variables. If we have a title, we have episode text, we have all these pieces, the model knows to look at this and go, okay, I need to insert items into these slots. Here's an example. And we want to give it a working example. So there's Katie's episode, and you can see the title, the URL plane, and then the summary. So we're giving it a what to do so that it can read that properly. You'll create summaries for each episode in the included episodes file. Here's the template to use for the newsletter. Ensure it is in Markdown format. Don't include those delimiters. So we have the title, the month, brought to you by the sponsors, Write an introductory paragraph explaining what's been on the show recently. Recent episodes and the episode summaries, it knows to put those there. Sponsored by, put the sponsored text. Fun stuff for our show. Summarize in one paragraph non-marketing content for the episodes, like favorite TV shows, music, and tech gear mentioned in the shows. Then we give it the final recipe, the execution. Step 1, read the ICP. Step 2, read the episode data. Step 3, create the summaries for each episode using the ICP as directed. Step 4, assemble the newsletter following the template and use the configuration information in the appropriate places in the template. Step 5, produce the final markdown of the newsletter in total, unabridged and complete. This prompt is almost 200 lines long. It is 8,400 characters, 1,200 words. What we're doing with prompts like this is we are way past, summarize this article, whatever. This is a piece of software. It's written like code.
Yeah, no, it's amazing how it's the entire baking list for the whole thing, because that is basically the same process I'm following, but it's codified and ready to go.
Exactly. And I think that is the perfect analogy. This is not just a prompt. This is a recipe, right? We're going to give it some ingredients, the ICP and the episode data files, and we're going to say, here's the recipe, bake this recipe. So I'm going to go ahead and take this and let's start a brand new Google Gemini session here. I'm going to take this whole set of instructions. I'm going to put that in system instructions. That goes right there. This will work with some modification in ChatGPT, but ChatGPT only allows 8,000 characters. So you're going to have to do some modification of the prompt if you want to work in ChatGPT. I also use Gemini because Gemini can hold an awful lot of data. As the model specifies, we need to give it some starting information, right? So we're going to give it the following information. We're going to tell it, this is for August 2024. This is for Marketing Over Coffee. These are our sponsors, and this is the text. And I copied this right off the webpage. So that's that information. Let's then go ahead and go into Google Drive here and pull out the Marketing Over Coffee ideal customer profile and the Marketing Over Coffee episodes, the episode text. This now works out so far to 52,000 tokens, which is about 35,000 words. And now we can either sit here and wait for the timer to run out. This will take this. When I run this, normally it takes 2-ish some minutes to spit this out. Although sometimes, depending on how Gemini is feeling, you can start to see something around the 25-second mark. But what you end up getting out of this, oh, look, here we go. It says August was a busy month. Recent episodes. Here's the title. So far, so good. It's Katie Robert returns to the show to discuss how to use AI and ideal customer profile and create actionable insights that marketing leaders can use to drive strategy. Chris and John discuss Meta's release of its open-weight Llama 2 AI model. Episode summary. John shares a classic interview with Ryan Holiday, growth hacker marketing. We have dynamic pricing, the concept of expiring emails, and new formatting options in Gmail. Alex McAlpine shows how Giphy is more than a GIF library. CDP functions. John and Chris on your CDP. Crystal Carter on SEO. And Wix Studio. The future of onboard AI, that was our WWDC episode. Cassie Bruno with the story of Gen Z parents. Sponsored block. Sponsors. The sponsor text is correct. Fun stuff. A wall of water bottles, Shock's Open Run Pro, Katie loves her new Sonos Era home theater system, and Apple Fitness Plus.
That's not. I don't think Katie has a Sonos though. That one it hallucinated. We did kick around Sonos, but I know she doesn't have one in her house.
Gotcha. So once this is done, you have a couple of choices. You can copy the markdown format file, which is literal markdown text. This is something that pretty much every system in the world can speak for interpreting the content. Or if this is good enough as a first draft, let's start at Google Docs because it's close to a WYSIWYG editor. You can right-click here and choose copy rendered and go into Google Docs, and it will take the formatted version and pop that into any WYSIWYG editor. So it's styled, it's got all the emoji, it's got the links already pre-baked. And so now you've got your first draft of a newsletter.
Yeah, and that level of markdown there, that should dump right over to Ghost too. So like that's a huge win right there. That's just like all because like it's got all the links pre-formatted. I don't have to yutz around with any of that stuff. Yeah, that's nice.
Exactly. So what we've got now is we've basically taken the ICP data, we've taken the podcast data, and we've taken our gigantic, huge recipe for a newsletter and put the three of them together, put it in the Gemini oven, and it bakes this thing up. Now, here's what's cool about this. The way we wrote the prompt is relatively agnostic, which is why we have to specify up front, like, here's what show it is, here's who the sponsors are and things. So when you go to do future versions of this, if you've got the data, you've got the transcripts and things, you could just change it to like September 2024, hand it the new file, and say, okay, go. And now you've got the September newsletter or the October newsletter. So this ran in 73 seconds, which is less than an hour.
Yeah, right. That's getting time in my day back. That's a wonderful thing.
Time of day back gets you that maybe not as attractive first draft. And if you don't like the format of the way that we built this, you edit that in the prompt.
Yeah, right. I changed it in the output. Yeah, because this is one of those things you can totally see where the first 3 or 4 times through, I make a list of all the edits that I'm making and then go back and just put all those in the prompt, and it will just spit out perfect when I'm done.
Exactly. So you would have it spit out in the prompt, and then the prompt will be formatted. So if you wanted, like, H2 headings for the titles and stuff, you could obviously have it do that instead of having it this way. I like to do it this way personally, just so I can verify that it's actually getting the correct information. But after a few runs, it's totally fine.
Right. Yeah. Once you know it works, then you don't have to spend as much time looking.
Exactly. So this, if I had to guess, this would probably take the hour, and I'm going to actually guess it's probably closer to 2 hours per newsletter issue.
Yeah, to get it from, first note all the way to, okay, I can push the send button now. Yeah, 2 hours is even maybe a little more on that, depending on how ugly or broad it gets.
Exactly. So this would probably shorten that down to maybe 15 or 20 minutes, because I'm sure you'd want to add some images and stuff, maybe probably have a more exciting title than the August 2024 newsletter, but it'll get you that first punch through.
Yeah, making those edits are easy once you've already got the meat done. It's simple to go and make a couple tweaks. That's a lot easier than coming up with each of those paragraphs separately.
Exactly. So that is the process for building that out. And if you are interested, I will put a copy of the newsletter prompt itself in our Slack community. If you go to trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, we'll put it there. We'll leave it there. It goes away automatically after 90 days. So you have to be an active member of the community. Free to join. Again, so trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. You can get that there. Now, here's the big question. Should you use generative AI to do newsletters? And we have to always bring up this reminder.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
So from that perspective, John, should we do this? Is this a good idea?
Well, yeah, because this newsletter, will not tear through the village shredding people. So it's, I'm not concerned for safety. And what we've talked about, and Katie, it's too bad Katie's not here. It's the, human in the loop, having the process and having the P's in there. Yeah, I would babysit this every step of the process, but there's just no doubt that it takes a lot of the ugly paperwork out of the front, a lot of the ugly copywriting. And so, yeah, it's definitely worth doing.
Yep. And there are prerequisites. So every episode has to have a transcript for this to work well. But once you've got that, then it's relatively straightforward afterwards. From your point of view, when shouldn't you use generative AI for this sort of thing?
I think the only risk is like you never set it up so that there's no human checking at any point of it. Like it just spits out at the end of the process and nobody looks at it. Like you've got to have a check and balance in there. But otherwise there's no, I guess. Yeah. And then the other one would be, if you're working in medical devices, you don't want generative AI playing with your pacemaker or anything like that. But otherwise, yeah, it's definitely an opportunity to get the grunt work out of the cycle.
Yeah, Renee says she's willing to attempt it.
I did maybe a sub 2-hour marathon with the AI optimized heart rate. You never know.
Exactly. I think if your newsletter is kind of like the way mine is, the way Katie writes, Ann Hanley's, where you have a very heartfelt, human-led, like letter part of the newsletter, that's probably not as good a candidate for this, because you'd be essentially asking generative AI to just write that whole opening block for you. Yeah, you could if you've got it in a different format, and then just have it, clean up the grammar and stuff. But having it write it out of whole cloth, probably not. A candidate where this is a really good idea is my pandemic newsletter. So it's my least favorite newsletter. I wish I didn't have to write it at all. I wish it would go away, but till that happens, that's not going to be the case. But what I've started doing with that one is I've had it doing all of the summaries of the news stories, because these news stories are very, very complex academic papers. Right? These are things that are 20, 30, 40 page studies, and condensing that down to a paragraph without losing key pieces of information is something that AI is just better at doing than I am. I'm not a doctor. I don't have a PhD in anything. And a machine is much better at taking the existing content and shrinking it down. So this would be an example of a really good candidate for a newsletter. Any kind of roundup newsletter where you're just rounding things up, AI is a great choice. Anything that is purely original content, probably less of a good choice.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like you said, this is perfect with the transcript. There's literally piles and piles of data that need to be combed through. That's perfect to set the bot to do it. Yeah,
exactly. You can see here, this is not stuff, this study is like, okay, here's, these particular receptors on lymphocytes. Like, yeah, I should not be writing about that.
Perfect boil down.
Exactly. Perfect boil down, one paragraph, and you get to the goods. The other thing, and I think this is worth pointing out, you could see here in this is yesterday's issue. I'm disclosing, hey, here's how I am using AI, so that it's clear for people, like, yeah, this portions of this newsletter are generated by machine. Here's which ones are, so that people are not surprised, if someone were to stick it into an AI contact detector and that day it worked, which, it's a flip of the coin these days. You could say, yeah, of course, portions of this are AI generated. We disclosed that. So you want to make sure that you do that.
Right. Yeah. And you're not going to read 5,000 pages of text for the next launch letter. That's
exactly. So to summarize the human way, if you want to use AI for newsletters that are great candidates for this are roundups. Content curation is a perfect case study for a use case for this. Any kind of summary, like the month's stuff. If you've got a blog and you're posting on your blog every single day, having even a weekly newsletter where you use AI to just wrap up those blog posts and present it in very short summaries would be a great way to use generative AI. If you are creating very strong personality-driven, human-led content, as like an actual letter, AI is not as good a choice there, and make sure you disclose it. Any final thoughts, John, about using generative AI for creating newsletters?
Look forward to the next automated episode in your inbox. That we'll have some fun with this, and hopefully we won't break too many things as we go.
Exactly. Again, if you want the prompt that we used, it's going to be in the Analytics for Marketers Slack group as the only place it's going to be. We're not going to put it anywhere else, although I probably will stick a copy in the paid course. But that's the place it's going to be. So we will catch you all next time once Katie is back from being lost in the woods wherever. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.